the challah board, it really remains parv, it retains its parv status. But on the other hand, once it's cut up and given to people individually by their place settings, so they likely or possibly may have touched the bread with greasy meat hands and the like, and therefore it no longer retains its parv status. We also spoke about the importance if you dip the food into salt, being mindful not to use that same salt for meat and dairy. On the other hand, when you have a salt shaker, the concern is much more mitigated because you're not actually putting the food into the salt itself. There, it's not a requirement to have separate salt shakers, but someone wants to have it's considered to be an extra chumrah, a very nice thing. Now, what about we will talk now about placemats and about the challah also. Actually, the challah we didn't get to yet, so I'm going to get to it now. We spoke about other things. Thank you so much. Yeah, I believe so. Yes. Halacha Chav Beis. We left off with on Friday talking about salt. And by the way, I just want to share something with you regarding salt. Al Rebbe writes in Shulchan Aruch, the minhag Chabad is to dip the challah into salt 3 times. The word melach is gematria 78. Mem lamed ches is 78. It's 3 times the name of Hashem. Shem Havaya is 26. Yud Kei Vav Kei is 26. 3 times 26 equals melach. So there's a spiritual Kabbalah component there. Okay, halacha base. Also, lechal meichel chol v'mapa sheshim shel meichel basar. We don't eat a dairy food on a meat placement. That's pretty obvious. Now we're on page chavav on top. Gam halechem anishar l'shulchan achas sudas basar. Also, the remaining bread on the table after a meat meal. Also, la'achlei meichel lechol. We cannot eat it together with the dairy food because again, there's a concern of cross contamination. Yesh mi shoyim because medu barak beprusas ketan shachatak le'achlan in basar. That some say that's only referring to, like I said, the pieces that have been cut off the actual loaf and are by people's individual place settings, and there's the concern they may have come into contact with meat. On the other hand, the actual remnant of the loaf sitting on the challah board, right in its own space, really still retains its parv status as long as you don't have unruly teenagers or children running around with dirty, meat fingers touching everything. As long as it's a civilized home, which hopefully it is. Okay, so fine. We said that. Because when it comes to bread by our table, we're not really that conscious. We're not really careful not to have it touch meat. The loaf itself, from there where we cut pieces, we're careful it shouldn't touch meat. You would be allowed to take those remnants and have it with a dairy meal. This is very relevant when it comes to Matzah Shabbos. You have leftover challah, you want to know, is this challah really truly parv now, or did it come into contact with meat? If you want to, let's say, have French toast with dairy in it or something of that like, if it's 6 hours after your meat meal, right? Something like that. Move on. As long as you know the people at the table did not touch the loaf of bread with hands that are full of meat grease. Now, today we eat with cutlery, so very often people's hands are really clean, unless specifically they were touching something because they were having trouble digging into the meat or the chicken, whatever it is. So once you remove foods that were eaten together with meat from the table before having a dairy meal, in other words, anything that there's a concern about cross-contamination, but anything that there's not a problem because of cross-contamination, I'll give you an example. A bottle of wine, I'll take your question in a moment. A bottle of wine where you pour from the bottle into cups. Not a problem to use that same bottle of wine for a meat meal or a dairy meal because you're not putting anything into it. It's not a dipping type of a food. But something where there's a concern you may have touched. So again, we have to use our seichel, we have to use our common sense to determine where is there a possibility or a likelihood where you have this cross-contaminant issue, and then we have to address it. And when we don't have a reason to be concerned of a cross-contaminant issue, then we leave it alone. We don't have to be worried. Yes.
So cutting it with a flake knife doesn't make it like or it doesn't.
If the fleshig knife was really clean, and 100% clean, it does not make the bread fleshig. However, we said earlier, it's proper to have a designated knife that's known as a challah knife, which is going to be par, because it's not proper to take a fleshig knife, cut bread, and then eat it with dairy. I just had this question this past Motzei Shabbos. There was a half a sourdough left over, and it was in a bag, and I wanted to have it. Actually, I think it was maybe Sunday morning. I wanted to have it with a dairy kind of application, or put it in a dairy toaster. So I asked one of my children, did this go into the fleshig oven? I don't, So we realized we were able to calculate that the Friday night loaf went into the fleshig oven because it was in the oven before Shabbos. But the loaf on Shabbos day did not go into the oven because the oven's already off by then because there's a timer. It just went on top of the stove, and there was no direct contact with fleshigs, so it's okay. So therefore, it was considered. It still retained its par status. Now, any questions on what I said so far? Good. Now we're going to get to halacha chav gimel, which is very, very. I mean, all these halachas are practical, but some of them are more strikingly practical than others. Mitzvah Shem, when you all set up your home, you'll know that a lot of young couples, they come to an apartment. Usually, they have just one stove, one oven to work with. And Mitzvah Shem, as you grow and you have a bigger apartment, sometimes you can, go into two like a fleshig stove and a milchik one. But in the beginning, you usually have one. So how do you navigate a scenario of a kitchen where you have only one stove and one oven? So there's all kinds of what I would call kosher hacks, kosher ways in which we can handle this, but we just have to know what we're doing. Halacha of Gimel. Taner gazei chashmal, which means a gas or an electric oven. One should not bake or roast dairy or meat foods at the same time, because the taste and the aroma goes from one to the other. If somebody baked bread together with meat, should not eat that bread together with dairy, because the bread that was baked in the fleshig oven together with meat is absorbing some sort of a taste. Because the bread becomes fleshig. One would be allowed to bake dairy foods after meat foods, as long as both the dairy food and the meat food are dry, provided that the oven is spotless clean from any remnants of meat or meat fat. Now let me explain. How does halacha define a dry food? It's a very important question, and we need to have a very clear definition of that. So I asked this question to my teachers when I was a student. I'm going to tell you what they told me. They said, if you take a bread, let's say a loaf of bread, let's say it's rye bread or sourdough or challah, and you rub it on a silk garment by the lapel, it's not going to make an oil stain, because the bread is a dry food. It might make some crumbs, and you just go like this, and there's no need for a dry cleaner's trip, because it's dry. On the other hand, if you take a piece of chicken or a piece of kugel, and you go like this on a silk garment, it's going to create an oil stain, and then you're going to have to it's going to render the garment dirty. So a dry food is a food that has no liquid. It's going to come out, okay? So a challah is a dry food. Bread is a dry food. But pizza is not a dry food. Many cakes are not dry foods because they're moist, right? A dry cookie or biscotti would be a dry food also, probably. These are some examples. Now, the reality is in an oven, ovens usually have some spillage or some remnants, so it's really not so practical to say that the oven's spotless clean all the time, unless your mother-in-law's coming for supper, and you cleaned it last night. But I'm saying otherwise, under ordinary conditions, right? So it's not really that practical. So let's look at halacha chaf dalid and then chaf hey, and then I'm going to tell you what we do in the real world, so to speak. Kol ha'omer hu le'inyan afiyah b'inyan bishul davar shein bein noizal mashka. It's talking about something that doesn't have any liquidity. Umale idim, and it gives off aval davar sheyesh bein noizal, something that does have liquidity. Umale idim, it gives off steam, right? Yesh lochash ha'taf shel ha'besori yal idim etikas ha'taner. Now we're concerned that the meat dish that's going to give off an aroma of steam is going to go to the top, the roof of the oven, the inner, I'm talking about the inside of the oven, and then it's going to make the oven fleshig. Then suddenly, when we start baking another food, it also has steam. The steam from that food is now going to go up to the oven. It's going to come drip back down. It's going to mix with the fleshings. It's going to have a forbidden mixture. Into the food. One would not be allowed to have that food with chalaf. So even if, let's say, I bake the parve food that has steam in it, let's say I'm baking a parve kugel, it's going to give off steam. It's going to connect with the steam from the meat. I would not be allowed to eat that kugel together with dairy itself. I don't have to wait 6 hours because there is no pieces of meat in it and there's no taste of meat inside my system, but there's still some sort of connection there. We're not allowed to have it together with dairy.
So that's a good food, it's like wet.
Yes, if it's moist. Halacha chafei. Can move on. It's self-understood, although we do have to just emphasize it. Only if both foods have steam that they give off. If one does not give off steam, if one does give off steam, but the pot is covered. Therefore, the steam is not going to escape the confines of the pot. Then there's no concern. So this is a very fascinating and very important point. So long as what I'm putting into the oven remains covered on all sides, then there's no, even if it does have steam to it, the steam has nowhere to escape. It's a self-contained steam environment, so to speak. And then it would not be a problem. So for example, if I take a parve soup, minestrone soup, it's good for the winter, yes? Or vegetable soup. This time of the year, we have to speak about things that are relevant for the season. Nothing like a hearty soup in the winter. So we have it in a fleishiga pot that's clean, or even a parv pot that's clean, and I put it into a fleishiga oven. It's dry, so the rack is clean. So the soup is really in a protected environment because the steam is not escaping. And the soup would come out, as long as the pot was covered the entire time, the soup would still retain its parv status coming out. Which brings me to another point, which I want to bring out, and it's going to bring me to another point in a moment. This gives us the basis for the concept of kosher airline foods. If you go on the airplane, which I'm sure you've been on an airplane before, and you order kosher food, the food is meant to come double wrapped. And they actually heat up the food in a treifa oven, together with treif. The reason why the food retains its kosher status, could be whatever the status is, meat or parva, depending on what's being certified, is because the double wrapping of the food serves as a protective barrier. The outer layer is actually getting hit with steam. It's true. But because that layer is now touching the next layer and it's a dry touch, yes, that means the inner layer, the food, is not getting any steam hit. It's dry. So the only steam in the food is going to stay inside the kosher environment. And as long as the food is delivered to you double sealed and you open it up, it's a kosher meal. And this is an example of a kosher act. The same is true when you go on vacation. You go to an Airbnb and the oven is not kosher. And it's not so easy to kosherize the oven. You're only going for 2 nights. It's not worth it. And Rabbi Hanoka is not available to answer your question. And you don't want to break the oven either, right? So you get a 9x13 pan. That's why they made them. They made them for the Jewish people, 9x13 pans. And you put that in a bigger pan. You put your food in the 9x13, you cover it. And you put that pan in another pan and you cover it. You put that in the treifa oven. It's going to take a little longer to heat up because it's but give it another hour, but you don't have to do anything. No koshering necessary. Put it, what they call set and forget. Come back 3 hours later. Just be careful not to open up the pan while it's inside the oven. Take it out and then open up. And this is actually something that we did. My family and I went on vacation somewhere, and the kitchen was not kosher. I'll take the question in a moment. And we brought along these pans. We had the food sitting, and we just had an extra hour of patience. And Baruch Hashem, we had hot food, and therefore nobody was cranky. And this is a very useful thing, because to kosherize an oven when you're only there for a short stay is not simple. And first of all, it's not easy to kosher it properly, and it's also could get into some complications which we wish to avoid. Okay, yes.
So, you were saying about like the second hour there's pan. What I usually do is just like have the pan with the cover, but then I'll put the whole like on top of it, like another layer of foil.
That's also fine.
Okay.
It's perfect. Now I'm going to tell you another story. I was traveling. I can't help it. I like stories. I was traveling, and I remember it made what they call an indelible impression on me. I was traveling on a kashrus trip. I was in Hartford, Connecticut, and I traveled with a toaster oven or an eating maker, something to make food for myself at night, right? So it's hot food. So I had a toaster oven, and my mazel, the toaster oven died that night, and before I made my food. But Baruch Hashem, I knew what to do. I wasn't going to go hungry. I went downstairs to the front desk and I said, can I keep kosher? Would you be able to help me into the kitchen? I want to be able to heat my food up in the kitchen, but I need to do it under special conditions. They said, sure, Rabbi, whatever. They brought me a pan, 9 by 13 pan, and I double covered the food in foil, right? Like you said. And then I watched them put into the oven. They didn't let me go in the kitchen, but I was able to watch. And they put it in the oven for like 45 minutes, double covered. And I sat there with my Rambam. I was learning to make sure they didn't uncover it. Came out, I went up to my hotel room and I ate. So it's a very practical eitzah. It's a very, very relevant piece of information. That's why they make silver foil, and that's why they make silver foil pans for the Jewish people. They're not going to go hungry, they're not going to become cranky. Yes. This is my own interpretation. Don't quote me. Yeah. Any questions?
So then could you, put like a plate, something with plate shape, if you double wrap it in dairy, and then put it, make the.
Yes, you may. You can. As long as you're careful nothing spills, you can do that. Yes. And I'll share with you another interesting point for those of you that are into sourdough. My better half is into sourdough. So you have the Dutch pans, what they call those, or is that called, are they called the Dutch ovens? Yes, Dutch ovens, right? So you're covering the sourdough, and often sourdough is baked at a pretty high temperature, like 500 degrees, which is why the igniters in my oven have to be replaced every year or two, because it's part of the oven. Anyway, but interestingly enough, if you're baking the sourdough for, let's say, 45 minutes or an hour at 500 degrees, and the bread is covered, so like even if it's in a fleshig oven, if it's clean, the rack is clean and it's covered, the bread remains parv. And not only that, but it also koshers the oven, because you have parv food going in there covered, and it's going in at a high temperature for an hour. It's actually koshers out the oven as well. So just an interesting point. Okay. Yeah. Any other questions? No, we're ready to continue. Halacha Chavav is going to give us the optimal way of how to handle a situation where we have only one oven. I have a little story for you before we get to that. It just came to me. It just like floated right into my brain. So there's a customer of mine who makes phyllo dough, puff pastry dough, an Israeli fellow, and they've had the Okei Hashgacha for like 45 years, probably, maybe 50 years. And my father-in-law, Rabbi Daniel Levy, blessed memory, told me the following story. His father, that's my wife's grandfather, Rabbi Beryl Levy, who was the kashrus administrator of the OK until 1987 when until he passed away. This story probably happened in the 70s or the 80s, don't know, early 80s. The Rebbetzin Chaim Mushka used to call Rabbi Beryl Levy with any questions she had about products, kashrus related, because he was a kashrus expert. So she told Rabbi Beryl Levy that she bought this Mazor's health pastry product, and she made, I guess, borekas or like knishes with them. And she said in Yiddish, "My man estes and hotas lieb." My husband ate it and liked it. So Rabbi Ber Levi told the owner of the company, "You should know that the Rebbe is eating your food, your products." Halacha chavav. Lochein aderech hamuvcheres l'mi she'ein le'yotana echad. Someone has only one oven. Umuchrach l'shtamish b'ei l'machal chabasar l'machal chalav, and they have to use it for meat foods and dairy foods. So liyaches hatana liyesei b'sori chalavi, to designate the oven to be either meat or dairy. Decide what's the most common type of food that's prepared in your home. Is it going to be meat foods or dairy foods? And choose the type of foods that are cooked most often in your home without a cover. For example, you decide that the oven's going to be fleischigs, and you can bake and cook in any kind of dairy food in the oven, roast without a cover, no problem. Have what they call a meat party, meat boards, whatever, meat focaccia bread, all good things. But don't put any dairy foods in the oven without a cover, without being double covered. If you clean the oven first, which is not so easy to do, it's a bit laborious, then you could technically bake a dairy food that has no steam in it. It's totally dry, but it's not practical. So don't try this at home. If someone designated the oven to be dairy, it would be in the reverse. And then if it's a dairy oven, anything dairy open, have a dairy party, pizza, whatever, all the good things. But if you want to do any meat foods, it would have to be double covered. Dry foods are not a problem as long as the oven's clean. But again, most of the time when the food's already going to be meat or dairy, it's hard to find a food that's going to be truly dry. And in any case, don't bake the meat and dairy at the same time, to clean the oven between one and the other. It's a teva. How do you keep the rack of the oven clean? If you're going to use the same oven for meat and dairy, put a piece of aluminum under the rack so that if anything spills, going to keep the oven clean, because any spillage from the pot on the rack will go into the silver foil. You just crumple it up and throw it out, and then the rest of the oven will remain clean. Okay, that's a general answer. Also, the kasher oven. Actually, we're going to get to that next. Halacha Chav Zayin. Any questions so far? Halacha Chav Zayin. In b'mikra nasa tana b'sori, if the oven becomes fleischigs, when you want to be able to cook in your dairy foods without a cover, or in the reverse, some say you can kasher the oven by cleaning it well. Wait 24 hours. Then turn on the oven for an hour. I asked a few Rabbanim this question. I asked Rav Tovia Kasimov, he's a Pesach in Granite. He said, you can definitely do this if it's from kosher to kosher, which means, let's say I have a kosher fleishig oven, and now I want to be able to kasher it to have dairy in it. So then I turn it on for 1 hour, right, at a high setting, like at 500 degrees, and that will kasher the oven. Because I'm going from kosher to kosher. Some Rabbanim would say you should wait 24 hours before kashering from fleischigs to milchiks. Some say you could even do it within 24 hours. When you're going from fleischigs to parv or milchiks to parv, everyone agrees you don't have to wait 24 hours. Okay, that's the whole the picture. On the other hand, if you're koshering an oven from treif to kosher, you do have to wait 24 hours. If you're koshering from chametz to pesach, you do have to wait 24 hours. But even so, there's an additional issue. We wouldn't kosher the oven by simply turning it on to 500 degrees. We would do what's called a self-cleaning. Self-clean, you don't have to wait 24 hours because it's a real liban gomer. It's an actual burning out, complete burning out. It's 900 degrees inside there. No living substance is going to be able to survive that. And it's like a 4-hour process where the oven locks and you really have to aerate the kitchen while that happens. So that qualifies as a liban gomor, which would be necessary when koshering from treif to kosher or from chametz to pesach. But be mindful and be aware. Some of these ovens have what's known as a steam cycle. The steam cycles are not a self-clean cycle. They're just more of a cleaning system, but they're not getting that hot. So a true self-cleaning is where it's going to get to 900 degrees for about 4 hours. It takes a long time to do that. By the way, for those of you that are koshering an oven for Pesach, if you're going to do self-cleaning, another, what I would call an Eitz Teva, a good piece of advice, that I learned the hard way, is to kosher your oven when you're self-cleaning. Do it like 4 days before Pesach starts. Because sometimes when you self-clean the oven, the igniter will bust, will break. And if the igniter breaks, the oven is not usable. If you do it 4 days before Pesach, there's enough time to get a technician to come down to change the igniter and have an oven that's going to work on Pesach. If you do it a day before Pesach, all the technicians are busy, it's not so easy to get them. So I'm just mentioning that. Not that we hope the igniter is going to bust, but it does happen sometimes. And by the way, they designed, I'm sorry, I'm going to be a little cynical now. I'm trying not to be cynical, but today's appliances are designed to die every 7 years. It's good for business purposes. So it's like the old machines would be very strong. Today, they're not so strong. So sometimes through the self-cleaning process, parts will break. Okay. Any other questions? Or any questions, I should say? Yes.
So, isn't it true though that before you like kosher, I think between anything, don't you have to like first like clean the oven? Like, make sure there's no remnants of.
So it should be surface cleaned, but you don't have to do a mother-in-law type of clean because it's going to burn out. If you're doing a self-cleaning, mamish is going to burn out. But okay, yeah.
Oven racks. Do you leave them in when you do self-clean?
Yes, they should be left in. They need to be self-cleaned, yes. Unless you're replacing them. Yes. And the same would be if the racks have what's called a sidewall that holds the racks in place, they all have to be in place. Yes. Okay, now we're going to learn about microwaves. It's a new technology, the Fiat, right? Years ago, I think our grandparents didn't have microwaves. What about a microwave? So the question is, can you kosher a microwave? If yes, how? What are the situations? What's the deal with that? Din microgal, which is a microwave, din tanavagaz. It's similar to a gas. Or could use it for meat or dairy if one type is covered. You should cover the entire food. Put something under where the food sits. So now, because by microwave, you have to be a little bit more careful because there's more pressure buildup and it's more likely that the cover would burst. So what you do is you cover it in such a way where the air can go out but not come in. So let's say I'm covering something with a bag. I'm going to fold over the bag so it's covered. I'll leave a tiny little spot for the steam to go out, but it's not going to go back in because it's a very small hole. So how do you kasher a microwave? Some say you can kasher a microwave if you wait 24 hours. You put a vessel full of water, meaning you put a cup such as this, yes, full of water. You put it, so you put, let's say, the microwave is going to be the size of, let's say, this frame. I'll put in like 3 cups, 1, 2, 3, or maybe 4. And then I turn the microwave to the highest setting for 20 minutes. And then what happens? And then it's going to get filled with steam. We usually say to Let's discuss with the Rav about this. If you do this, what I just said, the microwave has a tray that oscillates. So move around the cups midpoint, so that the area where the cups are sitting are also going to get a steam hit with steam. Now, that's how it works. We're up to halacha chav test. I just want to point out that some rabbanim maintain that one should not and one may not kasher a microwave from treif to kasher or from chametz to pesach. One is only allowed to kasher a microwave from kosher to kosher. Let's say it's a milchika microwave, and someone mistakenly put in a meat dish, not at the same time as dairy, after dairy, right, or something like that, or someone gave you a microwave and you want to kasher it to a certain status, whatever it is. But from treif to kasher or from chametz to pesach, not all rabbanim agree you could kasher. Some rabbanim hold you can still kasher. So what I advise people is as follows. If it's a non-expensive microwave, such as a tabletop that you can buy at Best Buy for $79, I mean, I'm not being trivial here, being petty, but it's not a huge sum of money today, right? So then, if a person could afford it, I would tell them, if it was used for treif, don't kasher it. Get a new one. But if it's a built-in microwave that's over the stove, that costs quite a lot of money. Those can cost, I think, I'm guessing $500 plus, right? If you want all the trimmings, it could probably cost close to $800 for a lot of money. If that's going to be a financial burden on somebody, I thought there are rabbanim that hold you could kasher it. Or if you want to be strict, then don't kasher it if it's treif for kasher. But that's the story. That's the score. Any questions? Yeah.
How does Chabad hold? Or is that also?
I'm not aware of a Chabad minig per se, but bli neder, I'm going to try to have a discussion with Rabbi Kasimov about this to see if there's a particular way in which Chabad Rabbanim asking. My wife's grandfather, Rabbi Ber Levi, maintained you could kasher an oven even from treif to kasher and from chametz to pesach, but not everybody agrees. I know that some Rabbanim hold that way, but not everybody agrees with that. Yeah.
So like, let's say that we're going to like an Airbnb somewhere and you'll use the microwave. Could we hold by the opinion that we wash it from treif?
So you definitely are allowed to, yes. What I advise people to do when you're traveling, it's an Airbnb or you're going to a hotel room, is to, I actually made I think I made a podcast on this. Kashrus be in the know if you want to search. But what I advise people to do is to kasher the oven, the microwave, and to cover the food. To cover the food, according to all opinions, it's not a problem. But this way, even if the cover burst and you already kashered it, so you're not going to be left without any food to eat. You'll be okay. That's the optimal way. By the way, in an oven setting, in a hotel setting, or in an Airbnb setting, you can assume that the microwave was not used within the last 24 hours. The reason why you can assume that in a hotel setting, if the hotel has a restaurant, which most hotels have, I'm assuming if it has a restaurant, the reason you can assume that the microwave was not used within the last 24 hours is because, first of all, not every hotel room is rented every night. And even if it was, if there's an in-house restaurant, a lot of people, guests would, if they don't keep kosher, they'll just go to the restaurant. They'll have much better food than the kind of food you put into the actual microwave. So because of that, you can safely assume that, unless you know otherwise. And an Airbnb, if it's not something that's in a season where it's being rented every night, you could probably assume that as well, unless you know otherwise. Okay. One more halacha. Halacha chav tes. Lefi kol ma shenispar yesh lehimona militlois kapes mizlogos v'demei melekirayim. Everything so therefore one should be careful and mindful not to hang, in these rustic kitchens. Yes, Brooklyn rustic type of restaurant. You have brick face walls and it's an open floor kitchen. You can see the chef doing things, right? It creates a certain ambiance and all that. So if you have the pots, whether it's the spoons or the frying pans and the pots hanging right above the stove top, if they're hanging really low, first of all, the chef can bang his head and become very cranky. That's a problem. But besides that issue, if you have steam emanating from the pots, yes. So then, let's say in a kitchen, in a restaurant, this doesn't really apply because the restaurant's going to be one kosher status. Let's say it's going to be fleischiks, not a problem. But if it's in your own home, yes, if you have low hanging pots, yes, they're a hazard, but they're also a kashrus hazard because if I have a low hanging dairy pot and there's chicken soup bubbling over in my 16-quart size pot, and there's only like a foot of space there, it's a problem. Now I have steam hitting my dairy pots, becoming trace. Just be mindful of that. We have 2 more minutes. We're going to stop here. I'm going to tell a little story. A fascinating story that happened in the 1940s. I heard it. There was a chassid named Rabbi Leibel Posner, passed away this year at age 97. He was one of the oldest living chassidim. He went into the Aron. He was the one who carried the Frierdiker Rebbe's Aron. What happened by the Levi, the Frierdiker Rebbe, there were older chassidim inside the car, basically the hearse, holding the Aron. He was right there, and they needed a 4th person sitting on the stool to hold the Aron as they went to the oil. And he was there. The Rebbe told him to go in. So he held the Aron. And he remembered, he had a fantastic memory. His mind was clear to the end. So he told a story that in the 40s, when he was a bacher in 770, a new Rosh Yeshiva came, and the boys used to play punch ball. Recess time, you play ball, you need a little bit, get off some steam. And some of the boys in the yeshiva, they were not all from Lubavitch background, they were just learning in the yeshiva. And the Rosh Yeshiva said, the boys shouldn't be playing ball, that's not for them, so one boy said, that's it, he's packing up, it's not for him, he's out of here. The Rebbe heard about this. Because before the Rebbe was Rebbe, the Rebbe was called the Ramash, and must have mentioned it to someone in the Rebbe's family. And the next day, the Frierdiker Rebbe's Rebbetzin of Hamadina, she lived on the Frierdiker Rebbe lived on the 2nd floor. Yes, so she found out she asked around what's the best kind of balls. She was told Spalding, good balls. She bought like a whole bunch of them, and when the boys were playing, she threw balls down to them from the porch. And that was the end of that. No one's going to say that the Rebbetzins, encouraging us. No one's going to stop till the boys stayed in the yeshiva. But behind the scenes, I think the Rebbe made sure of that. One more story I'll share with you. After the stalkers of the Frierdiker Rebbe, so there was a Yid, Rabbi Yisrael Gordon. He already passed away. A very, very, very funny person, a very fine person. So he had a license in the early 50s. Very few people had licenses. So he was asked to drive Rebbetzin Chamadina and Rebbetzin Chaim Mushka, right, mother and daughter, to drive them places. So he had a license. He drove them. So he drove them to Manhattan. Don't know. He waited in the car. They went somewhere. Drove them a few times, and the Rebbetzin they bought him a gift. They bought him a watch for what he did. And Rabbi Yisrael also drove the Rebbe to the oil a few times before the Rebbe had an official driver. So he told me the story. This I heard from him himself. No, I heard from someone else who heard it from him. So he was driving, and this is like the early 50s, and he was stopping like all the lights and everything. So the Rebbe said to me, Yisrael, are you as careful in Shmiras HaMitzvahs as you are with all the red lights? The Rebbe asked him in a loving way. Anyway. Or maybe the Rebbe said to him, you should be as careful as Shmiras HaMitzvahs as you are with the red lights. Anyway, remind me next week. I'll tell you a story about the Rebbe learned how to drive. The body of the Jewish life.
I'll miss you.
Well, if you leave for dinner.
Oh, yeah.
Think about it.